Good morning. We're back with Daniel and Tiffany with Rosenbaum Realty Group, and today we want to talk about the Landlord Tenant Act and what it is and what it governs. The Landlord Tenant Act governs the relationship between a landlord and a tenant. So Daniel, why is the Landlord Tenant Act important to you?
It's critical to understand the law because we're in the business of real estate. We're in the rental business, right? Especially for long-term, for short-term. It doesn't matter what kind of real estate business you're in. If you're in the rental business, real estate rental business, you need to be aware of what the laws are because it specifies who's responsible for what. What is the landlord's responsibility? What is the tenant's responsibility? Or as we like to say, that we shy away from the term tenant. Obviously, the law says tenant, landlord and tenant. Just to be specific, we refer to our tenants as residents or renters because it's a different form. It's a higher level perspective that we view them as a resident, and so they want to, be held to a higher standard. So it's critical that we know the law because then we can understand how we can run our business and who's responsible and what's illegal and what's legal, what you can do, right? So it spells out performance as well as far as who's responsible for maintenance, who's not responsible for maintenance, right? What are some things that could be illegal provisions in the lease agreement? Mm-hmm. And it also governs everything related to rentals.
It was actually updated not too long ago about bed bugs because Arizona was having an infestation with bed bugs. And so the Landlord Tenant Act actually spells this out, that residents are responsible for bed bugs if they brought them in the home. Now, they just moved in, that's different. It is a landlord situation. But if someone moves in and they've been there and they sent back their, we give them 72 hours to do their inspection when they move in. And if they send that back and they say everything's good and then they end up having bed bugs, it is their responsibility to make sure they take care of those bed bugs.
We also had a specific clause addressing that just so there's no ambiguity, so there's a lot of clarity involved with that. Because the last thing you want is to have something unclear in your lease. You want it to be very specific, very clear. You want it to be, there's no way they can misunderstand or that any party can misunderstand the terms and the conditions of it.
You need to have policies in place about this because if a resident says, well, I'm not going to do it, well, a property management company or a landlord needs to know what they're going to do in that time because bed bugs can spread and they spread rapidly. So a lot of times what we will do at Rosenbaum Realty Group, we will go in and take care of them if they're not eradicated within the first week, and then we will charge it back to the resident and make a payment plan. Because one, we don't want to lose the resident just because something happened, because things do happen, but we also want to make sure it's taken care of so that they don't spread to the other units or other homes around, because they can jump from human to human. So you need to make sure that they're taken care of and you don't have a huge issue on your hands. Because we've had multiple situations with bed bugs. It's not if, you're probably going to get them. That's why they put it in the Landlord Tenant Act, because they were having such a huge issue here in Arizona with bed bugs.
A few other points that the Landlord Tenant Act addresses, it's everything related to the state of Arizona. Obviously, we're subject to federal fair housing and federal law, which is basically just discriminates the 7 protected classes. But beyond that, specific to the state of Arizona is the Landlord Tenant Act. And it also addresses how many days is the landlord required to give an accounting of the security deposit, of refundable security deposit. It also addresses violations, okay? If there's a non-payment, what recourse does the owner or the tenant have in any type of violation? And specifically, the Landlord Tenant Act addresses maintenance, right? So the landlord is required to maintain a fit premise. So we take that as, generally speaking, when it comes to all the major systems, HVAC, plumbing, electrical, if there's something that's wrong with the functionality, that's the landlord's responsibility. Okay, changing filters, that's going to be on the resident. Okay, the tenant. We have a program though that we actually give them filters on a regular basis, on a monthly basis, to prevent any issues on the maintenance side with HVAC. So those are some of the basic things that the Landlord Tenant Act addresses. So we are subject to that. It also spells out, eviction proceedings. Again, that's related to non-compliance, non-payment.
So let's talk about a few of those. So it talks about the security deposit, and that's big here in Arizona. In the Landlord Tenant Act, it does specify that it's 14 business days, which people need to understand that. And you can't just mail it out because you need to have proof. You need to certify, mail that, make sure that you have proof that it was sent out. Otherwise, that resident can call back and say, hey, you didn't send my security deposit out on time. And if you do not have it legally binding, then they can come after you. How much, Daniel?
Twice the amount wrongfully withheld. It governs that. The other common issue that landlords deal with is when there's personal property left behind, and that's if there's been an eviction, there's been a lockout, or if they just had a bad moving out where they just left their stuff. 99% of the time, it's junk.
In the Landlord Tenant Act, it describes everything that we've talked about, but also talks about security deposits and how long you have to refund the security deposits when someone moves out. And in Arizona, the legal limit of a security deposit is 1.5 times the monthly rent. That's all you can charge in Arizona for security deposit. Now, every state is different. You need to know your laws in your state, but in Arizona, it's 1.5 times. Now, when a resident moves out, it also governs how much time you have to give them a disposition. We call it the deposit disposition, or refund them everything that's owed to them. And in Arizona, that is 14 business days.
It's definitely very important for the landlord to take a picture in case that's ever challenged as far as what junk or stuff was left. Okay, there's stories that we've heard from other landlords and other operators where, in fact, we know somebody that was sued because they claimed they left some jewelry that was worth several $1,000s and it was thrown out.
To make sure we're very clear, if a resident gets evicted and there's 14 calendar days, if they come within those 14 calendar days and say, I have medication, I have identification, or I have tools in the trade of that property, those 3 items have to be released to them with no financially backing. Meaning I couldn't say, hey, I want $1,000 for this. Medication, identification, tools of the trade, you have to release because that's how they make money. That's the backing, that's their medical. So make sure you understand that. And the Landlord Tenant Act explains all that. That's what's great about the Landlord Tenant Act. You can always fall back on it. It is governed by Arizona, and it makes sure the relationship between the resident and the landlord has some rules and understanding.